Good morning, everyone. My name is Sterling Higa, Chairperson of the Authority. I'd now like to call to order the April 2nd, 2025 At-Large Authority meeting of the Hawaii Community Development Authority. The time is now 9 a.m.
Thank you, Chair. In accordance with section, 92-3.7 Hawaii Revised Statutes, the Hawaii Community Development Authority is holding today's at-large board meeting virtually on Zoom. The Zoom link details were included on the meeting agenda. Therefore, members of the public are welcome to join us on Zoom and also at our physical meeting site at the American Brewery Building, 547 Queen Street, second floor boardroom, Honolulu, Hawaii, 96813. The HCDA communications staff is hosting this meeting. Once the meeting begins, everyone will be muted for clear audio. Board members, if you have any comments or questions, please unmute yourself to speak. It is important that all individuals clearly state their name, pseudonym, or other identifying name each time prior to speaking. If you wish to provide oral testimony and you are attending virtually, please indicate so by clicking the raise hand button found on your Zoom screen. If you are attending in person, you'll be called to the front of the room in the order that you signed up. All testimony will be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. Your testimony must be related to an item on the agenda. Before you begin your testimony, we ask that you identify yourself and spell your name for the record. When 1 minute is remaining, 1 minute remains will be called out. When 30 seconds is remaining, 30 seconds remaining will be called out. When time is elapsed, time will be called out, after which you will have seconds to conclude your testimony, and then your audio will be turned off. If you are attending in person, the presiding officer will call the next testifier. Keep in mind that this is an opportunity to share your thoughts with us. If you ask questions during your testimony, neither the board or the staff is required to provide an answer. If the authority's connection for the remote meeting is lost, the meeting will be recessed until the connection is restored. If the connection cannot be restored within 30 minutes, the meeting will be terminated. The authority will continue the meeting at another notice date. Thank you. Chair.
Thank you, Craig. HCDA board members, please remain visible and audible during the meeting. Also, please acknowledge you are present by either saying here or present. Let the record reflect that the following members are present. Vice Chair Ishii. Here. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you. Member Miranda Johnson is excused. Member Anderson.
Yeah.
Thank you. Member Evans.
Here.
Thank you. Member Streitz.
Here.
Thank you. Member Yamashita.
Here.
Thank you. Member Suji is excused. Member China.
Here.
Thank you. Member Sakota.
Here.
Thank you. Member Gordner.
Here.
Thank you. Member Leong is excused. I'm gonna
come back to this.
She's joining. Okay. Member Light.
Aloha.
Thank you. Member Kabibi.
Here.
Thank you. And member Yamasaki.
Here.
And I see that member Leong has joined the meeting, so present as well.
Chair, we have quorum.
Great. Thank you much for today's meeting. Board members will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments after an agenda item has been presented. Individuals from the public who have requested to provide verbal public testimony on a specific agenda item are on standby and will be permitted to provide their testimony respectively. Moving to agenda item number 2, approval of minutes. These are the regular meeting minutes of March 5th, 2025. Board members, are there any comments or corrections to these minutes? Seeing no comments or corrections, the minutes are approved as presented. Moving to agenda item number 3 for information and discussion. This is an informational presentation by the HCDA staff on a legislative proposal to transition the Kaka'ako Community Development District established under section 206E-32 Hawaii Revised Statutes to the City and County of Honolulu and discussion of possible next steps. Mr. Craig Nakamoto, Executive Director, will now present the staff report.
Thank you very much, Chair, and members. So although this is a Kaka'ako related matter, I thought it would be better to bring this to the General Authority board, just because a transition like this of one district not only affects that district, but also affects the other districts as well. So during the legislative session, in connection with Senate Bill 534, which is the Mackay Planning Bill. One of the proposed drafts contained a provision to sunset or transition the Kakako Community Development District in 5 years, to the city and county of Honolulu. That proposed draft never, made it. It wasn't considered, but the idea, I think, still remains. I think among certain legislators, there is some, favor to transitioning the Kakako Development District. And it's kind of viewed as in this way, that with the district being sort of almost 50 years old, and a lot of things being done in the district by HCDA, although there are some areas that remain to be developed fully, that it's time to transition the district. And this idea and notion that if we take this district out of HCDA, there'll be capacity and resources to focus on other things, within the state, besides Kakak, right? Within the state, doing TOD, doing other kinds of projects. So I think that's the idea. Like I said, even though the proposal didn't make it in, with regard to Senate Bill 534 and the amendment, I think this idea is gonna stay. And so I wanted to bring this to the board for information. And then in the next meeting or following subsequent meetings, I'll bring this to the board to maybe establish a permitted interaction group to the board to move this along a little bit further. As you'll notice in your board packet materials, this is not the first time this has been studied by the board. It was studied by the staff in the past. We also have a 5-year goal in our strategic plan to transition it. So it's been out there. It's been something that we've talked about before as a board, I think, and studied. And now I think this idea just accelerates a little bit more. Having said all that, 5 years could be not enough time to fully consider all the things that we have to consider in transition. Like liabilities on the books, credits that are due to developers, shared equity that's out there owing, permitted projects, not permitted projects, remnant road parcels, for example, parks that we own, what land is going to be transferred and what land is not going to be transferred. I think there's, and then of course the biggest issue is what is going to be the zoning rules, for the district, after the transition. Is the county going to adopt their own? Are they going to adopt, this, our rules and plan and rules? Can they implement that? So there are, I think, all those considerations. There are a myriad of issues that have to be considered by both the county and HCDA and the state. So this is just for information, Chair. I think like I said, in upcoming meetings, I'll suggest that we maybe form a PIG to look at this a little bit further. Right, open for questions.
Thank you, Director.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, Executive Director Nakamoto, I guess my couple of questions. First of all, were we approached by the county as well? Is the county involved, or is it strictly to the Senate at this time?
So for this time, it was strictly through a proposed amendment to Senate Bill 534 that this idea came up. I was not approached by the county on this.
Okay, so we've had no discussions with the county as,
No, not today. Yeah.
okay. And then the second thing, I think we also got to consider Block G.
I'm sorry.
Block G.
Yeah.
I think we have to take that into consideration for whatever we do going forward.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members, any other comments or questions for staff? I see Member Yamashita, and then we'll go to Member Strikes. Member Yamashita.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. What was the intent in the enabling legislation when HCDA was set up? Was there any thought given to this? And the second thing is, how does this compare with other programs or projects across the country, perhaps? Because what I've seen in other places is if HCDA is a kind of a redevelopment authority, I don't think that redevelopment authorities typically hang on to properties they develop, at least in the ones that I've seen. But anyway, so those are my two questions.
Yeah. So, Member Yamashita, thank you for the question. I think when the HCD was created in 1976, the intent was that we would be a redevelopment agency to initially redevelop the Kakako area. I think to your second point, I think redevelopment agencies were not intended to continue indefinitely. I think they were probably intended to do their job to redevelop. And once they were quote unquote done, then the redevelopment agency would transition. As to properties, there are certain properties right now that HCDA owns, that we'd have to look during the transition as to what properties we'd want to maintain for us, because there are assets that are revenue producing to HCDA. So I don't think all of the properties would necessarily transition or get conveyed to the city.
If I could add one more layer in response to your question, Member Yamashita, one of the complications is the overlapping jurisdictions of the state and the county. So HCDA being a quasi agency of the state and the county being a separate jurisdiction, there have been throughout HCDA's history, not only in this district, but also in Kalailoa, issues with the conveyance of things such as roads or other infrastructure to the city, which has complicated some of that relationship. And so I think to the point that's discussed in this 2020 report or 2019 report, but also to Director Nakamoto's comment, there are unresolved issues about how a shutdown of HCDA would be accomplished. You could imagine if this were a county agency, that process of transferring assets, conveying things might be much simpler, but given Hawaii being what it is, like maybe not much simpler, since the county struggles to convey assets to itself all the time. So there are just logistical hurdles more than philosophical ones. I think the intention of the statute at the beginning is fairly clear that the redevelopment will occur, and HCDA would not continue to exist perpetually. Of course, in the intervening 50 years, HCDA has gone from being a single district to having He'ia and Kalailoa added, and now Pulahunui, now theoretically every transit-oriented development district in the state, which has increased the scope of it and probably shifted from that original model of this, redevelopment authority. So I hope that context is helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add, if I could, just one comment, and that's planning and developing an asset is one thing, but then being responsible for maintenance and management, that's a whole nother, that's a huge can of worms. And I just don't know if HCDA is willing to do that, wants to do that, but I mean, that's got to be part of the discussion in this. It's a huge issue. So that's my final comment.
Thank you.
Remember Yamashita, yeah, I do want to state that that was taken into consideration when we did the Kaka'ako Park transition as well to the city. That was a very complicated transition as well, both from a state agency and city agency perspective, because we understood the really what the purpose of HCDA was from a redevelopment perspective versus a maintenance perspective.
Remember,
And then, sorry, and then also just to clarify, just want to clarify too, that my feelings about this transition. If asked about it, is, I'm generally okay with the transition. I've talked to the staff about this when it first came up during the Senate bill discussions. Just because things tend to get out and I didn't want staff worrying about this. I'm not. This is not a shutdown of HCDA. This is just a transition of one district. And it's a shutdown of one, it's a transition of one district, but I think there's plans for HCDA to do more within, the state, in so many different areas. So I'm not that concerned about it. I look at this as being an opportunity to do more things, I think. So, and there is a lot of details that need to be worked out in this, a lot of details. Park transfer was just one, 2 parks. This is gonna be a whole district, so it's gonna be complex. Sorry, member streets.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think just wanted to kind of reiterate what's been said already, but I appreciate that you and staff have brought this early before the board, before any sort of board consideration of action, because I think, and also just compiled all the information, especially for my benefit, having joined after a lot of this was completed already, that that as the reports point out, there's a lot of outstanding questions and logistical issues to sort through before any sort of, I think, informed action could occur. And I think just as also noted, there's some pretty long timelines that have occurred through like the case studies or the park transfer, other issues with the road transfers, that really, I think, benefits from having an early discussion and further investigation into this. I was curious on some of the prior reports status and whether anything's changed since then. I noted that it mentioned, like, I guess in the report, that there was sentiment that the central portion of Kaka'ako wasn't fully, I guess, meeting the criteria for development. And then I noticed in one of your images in the back, exhibit C does show what seems to be a lot of development, either built or planned for that central portion of the district.
Mhm.
And then maybe this is for Member Evans, the technical study. I saw that was mentioned somewhere in the report that OPSD was going to do. I don't know if that ever was completed or anything else to add on that.
I think, so if you look on, in exhibit A of the board materials, the pages are not numbered, but it's under analysis. Analysis, and if you flip the page, there are a few of the things that were mentioned have already occurred. For instance, it says that one way of achieving that goal is for HCDA to adopt rules related to TOD, and we have adopted TOD bulk area TOD overlay rules recently, right, that address that. And then Victoria Ward, it mentions that Victoria Ward and Kamehameha schools are still vested on their master plans. At least one thing that has changed is the master plan for Victoria Ward has terminated, right, in January of last year. So there has been some changes since then, notable changes.
And that east-west connection, right, with the Pohukaina and Oahe realignments, when that is complete, that's probably, I think, the most significant change in recent years, in terms of increasing connectivity between the two master plans. And then obviously Ward's continued plans for some of the block consolidation around Ulana and additional development there helps to activate the central part. But I think the broader point about like the top, so like Ilaniwai, Halikawila, Queen Street, central portion of Kaka'ako, I think is still valid today. Where in general, that industrial area has not redeveloped in the way that they probably imagined in 1976.
Yeah, and also to add to that, Chair, I think as the 2019 report states that Central Kakako has seen little state investment. In the future, I don't foresee, the legislature funding, infrastructure improvements in Central Kakako. I don't see that as real, I don't see this being realistic that they're gonna. In some ways, Central Kakako hasn't changed that much, but I think there's also this idea that we should keep some of the industrial, we should keep some of the industrial character of Kakako amid all of the other development that has occurred. So there is that, and then the Victoria Ward amended and restated development agreements require Victoria Ward to keep a minimum square footage of industrial property, just because to keep that character. But I think over time, and I don't know how long that's gonna be, but over time, the character of Central Kakako will eventually evolve over time, no matter what kind of requirements we have to, it is gonna evolve naturally. Not now, maybe not in 5 years, but sometime.
Oh, yes, Member Sakota.
Yes, good morning. So, Craig, can you give me some idea of, when I start hearing things about, talk about this transitioning, one of the concerns that comes up is just the flow of funding to the HCDA, and how it's allocated, let's say, to Kaka'ako versus Kalailoa versus Heia. Are there any concerns or things that we should be thinking about in terms of keeping that funding going, I guess, during a transition period where we're trying to wind it down?
So I think during a wind down of Kaka'ako, let's say from this point till when it actually transitioned, we could still get some funding from the legislature for certain projects, but I think the likelihood of getting funding during that transition period is gonna be very low. I don't see getting a lot of state funding for Kaka'ako, but I think for the other districts, I think it's still possible to get funding for Kalailoa, Pulehunui, Heia as well. But I think if we start this transition process, I don't see the legislature investing a lot of money into Kaka'ako for infrastructure.
All right, thank you.
Member Sakota. Members, any other comments or questions for staff?
Just a follow-up. So I guess your recent kind of mention of legislative funding, when the HCDA went through the process of transferring the parcel, I guess there were noted improvements that needed to occur before the city was willing to accept. Was that something that was, I guess, a struggle to obtain funding from the legislature on that sort of?
Yeah, I wish Lindsay was here. She was involved in the park transfer. And I don't even remember what that all was, but what I've suggested to legislators when we talk about this issue about transition is, if they're gonna require us to transition like this, from Kaka'ako, perhaps there should be some legislative funding to cover some of these, kind of payments that might need to be made. Now, okay, so that might be, that might be a struggle to get that money, but I think there should be some consideration given to, have funding like amounts for payments to the county, city.
Lindsay is
Oh, Lindsay's
available.
Sorry,
Hi,
Lindsay.
hi, sorry, I'm just upstairs.
Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. For the funding, I know so the whole process was a really long, drawn out transfer process. Originally, we didn't contemplate funding anything because we were going to do certain activities, but throughout the course of time, the maintenance became an issue, so we decided to kind of throw in funding so that the city could do some maintenance activities themselves. It just kind of made sense for them to renovate, say, the bathrooms to their standards rather than us do it and it not be what they wanted, as an example. So I believe, funded it ourselves. I don't think we asked for legislative funding. Again, that wasn't something we previously contemplated. So if we did contemplate that in the beginning, perhaps we would have, but it just kind of came up through the course of transfer that the city wanted extra help to make it up to their level of standards. And so we just kind of threw it in. I'm not sure the source, if it was public facilities or revolving fund, but it was HCDA monies.
Do you remember the amount, Lindsay?
It changed, I think, twice. It grew. So I want to say it was maybe, what was it? I can pull some documents and check.
I think it's listed as 2.2 million in the report.
It's pretty substantial.
It's just one part.
It was, yeah, it grew. I think it might have started at 700. That's the number I recall. And then as we progressed, I think we had issues with the grass. And so they said, oh, we need to redo all the irrigation. We need more money for that. And so then we increased that dollar amount. But it was a very drawn out process.
Thank you, Lindsay. I think if I can add one more thing, if we're gonna try to go to legislature for funding to cover some payment amount, like there could be a lot of resistance to that. Just because, and I'm just relaying what I think that the response might be. So there's been a lot of investment in Kakako by the state in infrastructure. That investment has resulted in the tax base, the real property tax base going up. The beneficiary of the real property tax base has been the city over the years, from 1976 or 1980 all the way to here to now. So that could be the counter argument to going in for some kind of funding to fund some kind of payment, even if the payment amount or the reason for the payment is, valid, sound. That could be something that we encounter. Member Straits.
Yeah, and I think there was a thoughtful recommendation in the PIG report from 2020 about trying to figure out what would be acceptable with the city before trying to adopt any sort of like legislation, just so there's some realistic expectations, because I know, yes, property taxes increase, but I think the city used probably a portion of that at least to provide some sort of county services to the area, like HBDs, HFDs, so forth. But yeah, so I think just going into any sort of decision that's informed would be in the best interest.
So
Members, any other comments or questions for Craig or the staff? I'll just put a cherry on top briefly, which is I think forming a PIG is a good idea. My recommendation for membership of this PIG is that in addition to representatives from HCDA, we also include representatives from the state, ideally people who would be involved in making funding decisions, and representatives from the city, ideally those who would be involved in conveyance and in funding decisions. And the reason is, I think the number one reason these kinds of transfers fail is that there's not a clear plan or MOU in place for how responsibilities will be divided between the city and the state. I do think it is possible to come to, provisional agreements that can help in the process. But I can almost guarantee that the process will fail if there are no provisional agreements in place. And we've seen this pretty much all over the place, including in this agency's history, the process of acquiring Kalailoa and then divesting some of the parts of Kalailoa. This is complicated, of course, by the fact that both city and state administrations and decision makers change. So Blangiardi will be there another few years and then he'll be gone, and there will be a new administration that may not share the priorities of the Blangiardi administration. So I think as we think about this pig, it's worthwhile to almost draw the circle bigger rather than smaller. Because if we draw the pig circle too small, some of the decision makers in the pig may no longer be there in 3 years, in which case, an agreement is worth nothing. If we draw the pig bigger, it may be harder to achieve the coordination and agreement on what should be done. But it makes whatever agreement we come to more durable across time and more likely to be enacted. So that is my one recommendation. Although I share, I think, the board's sentiment and Craig's sentiment that these processes are not fun.
And thank you, Chair. Also wanted to thank Ryan for preparing the staff report and for looking into this. I think going forward, Ryan's input, as well as EPOC's input too, because he's been involved, Lindsay's input because of the park transfers will be invaluable as we move forward. So just wanted to thank Ryan for the help in putting together the staff report and looking into this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, board. We'll move now to public testimony. Do we have any persons pre-signed up for testimony? Any persons present or online who wish to provide testimony? Seeing none, we'll close testimony and move to the next agenda item. This is an informational presentation and update by the HCDA staff regarding the following bills: HB 1007 HD2, HB 818 HD2, SB 534 SD1, and Governor's Message 735. Mr. Craig Nakamoto, Executive Director, will now present the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. And at the outset, I wanted to thank Garrett, Ryan, Francine, Tommy Lynn, and others for helping out on this list, supporting on this legislative session. It's been a very busy, I think, legislative session. So just want to thank everybody for their help. I'll kind of start with the easy one and work through the more challenging one. So I'll start with GM 735. So GM 735 is the governor's message for the confirmation hearing for Member China. It will be held on April 14th at 1 o'clock in front of Chair Inouye's Water and Land Committee. I think Chair Inouye is familiar with Member China, having confirmed him, I think a year ago. So we're working out the details, and I think Member China is working with the committee clerk and office manager to submit the required information. So congratulations to Member China. Going backwards on the list, so Senate Bill 534 is the Mackay bill related to the proposal to allow residential development and also to allow 400-foot buildings on some of the lots owned by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So the bill went through the subject matter committees. And then as it was going to WAM, there was some proposals to further amend that bill that required going back to the subject matter chairs for concurrence, prior concurrence. Prior concurrence was something that was brought up by Senator Ihara in the subject matter committees. So I think the respective chairs could not agree on those amendments, prior concurrence. So the bill was deferred indefinitely. House Bill 818 is the bill that would have given the Waiakea Peninsula on the island of Hawaii in Hilo to HCDA as a community development district, and also would have transferred land and leases of DLNR to HCDA. This topic has come up before in previous legislative sessions. If you recall, maybe two the legislative session ago, then Representative Nakashima introduced a kind of a similar bill. Chair Chang and I worked with Representative Nakashima to defer that bill, and instead we worked with DLNR staff. Ryan and his staff worked with DLNR staff, and we had PBR Hawaii do a feasibility and market study for Banyan Drive to identify some, land uses or what might be feasible on Banyan Drive. So in this legislative session, a bill was introduced to do that. The bill went through the House. Okay, there was some changes. DLNR objected to the transfer of land. That was the most objectionable part of it, and I understood why. So Chair Chang and I, and actually Director Tokioka met, we talked about it, and we said we're willing to take that portion of the bill out to allow it to move on. So that part of it was removed. When it crossed over to the Senate, Chair Inoue just decided not to hear it. And I'm not sure why she didn't decide to hear it, but she decided not to hear it, so it's dead for this session. Next week, I'm gonna brief the Banyan Drive Hawaii Redevelopment Authority, which is a county established, group to look at Banyan Drive redevelopment, and I'm gonna just brief them on the status of House Bill 818. I suspect that this will get resurrected next session in some form. I'm not sure what and how it's going to be done, but I'm sure it's going to get resurrected. In the meantime, there is $1 million in planning money that's in OPSD right now for master planning for Banyan Drive, Waiakea Peninsula. So our thought is that we continue, but we use that money now to master plan for the district in anticipation that, the bill might get resurrected next session. And so we're working with Director Evans to work on the funding and either transfer or some kind of MOU. But I think it's gonna come back in some form. But there's a lot of good things happening on Banyan Drive, so I'm optimistic. Okay, so House Bill 1007 is our administration bill. The intent was to one, allow us to assist other state agencies. That was one big part of it. The second part was to streamline the TOD section 206 E Part 10 and take out the 4 county boards and just have the activities of that program report up to the General Authority Board for administrative simplification. Excuse me. But I think what started out as administrative simplification has turned into administrative complication. It passed through the House, okay, with some questions, but it passed through largely unamended. Excuse me. When it went to the Senate, what was added to it was 3 provisions. One provision was to allow us to issue bonds in TOD areas and in other parts of other, our community development districts. And I think this provision was essential, especially for the stadium development effort currently. The second provision that was added was to allow us to use our powers outside of our community development districts, which I think aligns with our ability to assist. The third provision was added in, which was to incorporate the provisions of Senate Bill 1669, which is a TOD partnership board bill that creates this TOD partnership board with staff, with an executive director under the state DOT department. 1669 is still moving. It got approved by the House Finance Committee yesterday, but essentially the guts of it is within 1007. And I'm only discussing what I know for sure now, and that's the only, amendment that I know for sure. There's been several amendments proposed for the next SD2, but it's still in flux. So it's hard to know what's going to happen. And tomorrow there's decision making on this at 10. The 1669 provisions, I think, is problematic within HCDA. It's going to create a separate board structure right now with a separate executive director and staff. It's kind of like a subsidiary or arm. While it's meant to act independently, it's still under HCDA and the authority. While it's intended to act independently, I think there's still a lot of things that this board or a board are going to have to oversee. For example, if that board wants to issue bonds and have the bonds underwritten, I have serious concerns that a board like that can issue bonds without HCD's board agreeing to it and agreeing to the debt, what the debt service is it sufficient to cover those bonds? So while the intent is to allow that partnership board to act quickly, do certain things in communities, I doubt it's can be implemented in that way. The intent behind 1669, as I understand it, and I'm still trying to find out what it is, but in certain communities all around the state, apparently there are things that need to be put in there, like parks, more schools, more amenities, other things that make a community a community. To the extent those things are missing, this 1669 and now 1007 attempt to address that. I have two concerns about that. I think one, a lot of what 1669 tries to do is redundant to what we can do in 206E and under our TOD section part 10 of 206E. The second is I think it attempts to really bypass and circumvent the process that's in place right now for TOD districts, which is OPSD, TOD Interagency Council, and to the extent project needs to be implemented, HCDA does the implementation. So I think it tries to circumvent that process a bit. And the board structure that's being contemplated, at least right now in SD1, it's very state heavy, state heavy and less community members on it. I mean, I think it's more state heavy and less community members on it. So I think that's a little bit of a concern for me as well. But I think the biggest part is the implementation of it. And my position has been clear that I don't want it in 1007, but I think it's going to have a life of its own from this point on. Member Evans? Member Evans wanted to ask some comments.
Thank you, Chair. OPSD testified with strong concerns on SB 1669, which is the bill that would create a transit-oriented development community improvement partnership. Because we feel that it is duplicative with what the Transit-Oriented Development Council can do in partnership with its members, including other state agencies like HCDA, which have the same tools of being able to float bonds, to fund projects, to put community amenities into new developing or redeveloping communities. But I also want to point out that many of the amenities that are cited in SB 1669 are ones that the county does as a normal course of their business in terms of their parks department, their facilities department, and their planning department. So it's looked to me like it was duplicative on both the state and the county levels. So we're waiting to see what happens. I'm not speaking for the TOD council because although I'm a co-chair, it doesn't take a position on these kinds of bills. And did not. So I'm speaking for OPSD and myself.
Thank you, Member Evans. Members, any other comments or questions for Director Nakamoto? Just want to briefly offer that if the bill passes, maybe I could have like a Siamese twin chair. And then we could both hold the gavel together and then read the agenda with one voice. But that is essentially what they want. The metaphor you're looking for is Siamese twins, where there would be two agencies connected, but it would not be clear which agency is actually in charge.
I think the according to the sponsors of bill, this 1669, it's to create sort of ownership in these, amenities and how it's done, what gets done, and also accountability. But I'm not sure how you achieve those two things when you put something within an agency and the governance is kind of diffused and unclear. And I also don't see the value of creating more government at this point with another agency that's duplicative. But those are my views, and we'll see what happens tomorrow, and then we'll figure out the path forward. But I wanted to thank Member Evans and Steve for their testimony throughout this. It's been challenging to navigate this one. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. But also want to thank Ryan, Garrett, Francine for helping me navigate through all of this.
Great. Thank you, Director. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Board. We'll move now to public testimony. Do we have any persons pre-signed up for testimony? Do we have any persons present or online who wish to provide testimony? Seeing none, we will close testimony and move now to, I believe, it's the final item on the agenda, the report of the Executive Director. These are the monthly report and other status reports, including the monthly financial highlights for February 2025.
Thank you, Chair. And Garrett can answer any questions on the financial. During this section, I'm going to try to highlight budget items in the HB 300, which is the state budget, but at least I haven't seen the SD1 come out yet, so kind of premature to talk about budget items, but I'll bring that up at the next meeting, which is going to be May, and we'll have a better idea, or inform the board separately about it.
Members, comments or questions for Director Nakamoto or the staff? Seeing none, public testimony. Do we have any persons pre-signed up to testify? Any persons present or online who wish to provide testimony? Seeing none, we'll move now toward adjournment. My apologies for the cough. And also for Director Nakamoto's cough. He is allergic to VOG and I am allergic to late amendments. And we will now Thank everyone who joined us on Zoom or in person. This concludes our business for the at-large authority meeting. The meeting is adjourned. The time is 9:50. Reconvene at 10 a.m. for the Kaka'ako board meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mel.